Well, as a lot of people start to plan for 2023 and getting a grasp of how they're going to approach that year. It's unbelievable to see the enthusiasm behind most people in the real estate industry when it comes to the end of a year or the start of a year itself. I think there's a couple of big questions that everyone probably needs to ask themselves, however. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. Being real with yourself when it comes to planning for the year ahead is one of the things that I think is one of the biggest delusions when it comes to the real estate industry. The one thing that I've seen in the planning process as we've approached 2023 and beyond is the level of disappointment in some agents' eyes on what they believe was a poor year in 2022. And I want to point out a few things today as we go through when we talk about the realistic side of the planning real estate business is that understanding and reflecting incredibly well on the year that was and being as aware as possible is certainly one of the things that I think has gotten in the way of a lot of people's, anticipation of a better year than the year before. The ongoing growth pattern that everybody thinks that they can experience within the real estate industry is just one of which all the way up. And that comes from obviously diving and indulging into the real estate industry's content that isn't as real as what we're trying to be, as what we like to think. Now, again, I make mention of this multiple times through any of our podcast episodes and through any of the things that we put out, is that some of the conversations that we have are a little bit prickly, but we get to see the industry in such a vast array internationally, but also through North America, that we can see better than most from 1,000-foot view some of the defects when it comes to planning. The first thing that I want to talk about is actually the decision of whether or not you want to grow your business or whether or not you want balance. That decision in the beginning of any planning perspective can actually make sure that you can really hold yourself accountable to the way that you want to be held accountable. A lot of the times what happens is relationships are frayed and severed by mentor and mentee or business owner and realtor or whoever it may be, coach, realtor, because an agent believes that they want to be held to this individual standard that they really have not bought into. I think that one of the questions we really need to ask ourselves, and the first question in any of our planning coming up, is do we want to grow? Now, if you feel that you are socially forced to say grow, then I don't believe that you're going to be bought into it 100%. If you don't really feel it at that particular time, maybe it's multiple checkpoints as you go throughout the year. Because if you don't feel like you have the energy to grow at that point, and you think, well, hey, maybe if I just tell myself I want to grow this year and I'll feel it later on, it just all seems a little bit back to front. And it doesn't feel like there's a deep commitment to it in the very beginning. Because, guys, the one thing I do want to make mention of is understanding whether you want growth or you want balance is the word that we use. Growth or balance. Now, that's not to say that you can't have a really good and successful year, maybe the same as what you did the previous year, maybe within 10% of what you did in the previous year. But if you are going to do that, you're choosing to have balance at that point. The biggest misperception, I think delusion of grandeur, is how I'd place it in, I believe, the real estate industry, not to mention in any of the industries that are commission-based or growth-based, is the decision to grow, I believe, is one that you would ultimately make where you understand that if you are making that decision that you want to grow your business, you are in the build stage of your business, and it is impossible to have both balance and growth. Now, you might say, well, I've proven you wrong. I can prove you wrong. I do all of these different things. I might not have children. I might not have obligations. I might not have anything at all. And I have balance and I have growth. And if you manage to master that, it is something that such a few individuals have mastered, that I don't believe it would be fair to speak to that in the industry or in any of the industries, really. I think that if you make a decision to grow, you need to understand that the pendulum of swing to the growth sector is going to be one of which is going to consume your life. If you're really making a decision to grow profoundly, it's one that you can't have it just as a hobby. Choosing hobbies usually means that you've chosen the easy way out. And we'll talk about that again. But I guess that the other pendulum is having balance. Okay. And having that balance in your life that then you've obviously put the time and effort in, or you've accepted, or that you're comfortable with what you're going to do. Most of the time, when I sit down and do business planning with agents and I coach them through this, I talk to them about deal count. How many deals do you want to do? I want to do 35. Great. Well, let's really go and hone in on your sphere of influence. Now, the classification of your sphere of influence is that people that know who you are and what you do. If a stranger was to call them and say Ben Brady, they would say Harcourts and real estate. Okay. They would say auction. They would say whatever it is that you ultimately do. They know who you are, what you do. You don't have to have a deep-seated relationship. They know who you are and what you do. And typically when it comes down to their sphere and people want to build that referral-based business, the volume of people that are classified in their sphere of the sense that I've just said versus the deal count is off. We usually see around a 10%. It's really hand grenade close of a 10% return on your database. And I mean across thousands of agents, across very established and premature businesses, we usually see about a 10% return on either referral business coming from that listing, whatever it may be, that comes from that sphere itself. And they might say, well, I want 35 referral deals, or I want 35 deals next year. But their database is only at 200 people that know who they are and what they're doing. That means there has to be an element of going out and compiling some cold relationships within that you can then become the voice of real estate within your sphere to those people to get that passive amount of business coming your way. And then your primary focus becomes the nurturement of that business. And guys, that takes an effort and that takes a pendulum swing to the growth sector. If you need to grow, that pendulum swing has to be all the way there, because if you think that you can have this middle pendulum between balance and growth, if you can master that, congratulations to you. But I very, very rarely see it. I very, very rarely see it. And if they do have it, they have a different life circumstances that doesn't fit the common mold of what we see in the real estate industry itself. Sorry to interrupt your podcast, but I wanted to take an opportunity to mention a value add for your real estate business that we're going to be releasing on the 16th of January. Our Harcourts Auction business planning template has been designed over a decade of dealing with the highest performers in our industry. We use our business planning format to go over the numbers, to make sure that you understand exactly what you need to do in order to hit your goals. Now, we take not only the numbers of deals that you need to do, we also look in and a deep dive into the prospecting metrics, not only from an industry standard, but how do you have a diverse range of inbound leads to not only build your sphere of influence, a repeat and referral business, but also understanding the farm areas or the individual marketplaces that you're targeting can produce the results that are needed. Too often in real estate, we see people that are going after areas that won't sustain what they're looking to achieve. And our business plan will ensure that not only you have a feasible farm area, but also that there are many, many different ways in order to build the lead side of your business, which builds your SOI and which also creates a repeat and referral business. That episode's coming out on the 16th of January. It'll be both on podcast, but also on YouTube as well. The free business planning template will be available. This will change the game. So being absolutely upfront with yourself, do you want balance or do you want growth? Now, that might mean just committing to that individual sector for a quarter. That individual atmosphere of your business might just want to do that for a quarter and then reevaluate. That's fine, but just be real. Because otherwise, if you're holding yourself accountable, you'll create excuses. If others are holding you accountable, then they will simply be disappointed. And you don't want that in the relationships that mean something to you. Next thing that I want to talk about outside of the decision of whether you're growing or living a balanced life is actually the COVID goggle effect. We've all heard the terminology beer goggles before, okay? And in heightened view of what something really is, okay? However, I think that the COVID goggles has really taken a toll in people's expectations of what they are capable of in their real estate business. And that's not to say anything derogatory around people that are working really hard out there. I think that their expectations have been clouded as a real estate marketplace that is very rarely seen existed for such a period of time. Now, you may or may not agree with me on this, but when I had to bring a non-distressed auction platform to North America, I had to bring it in front of a board of directors, and I had to go through and show them that in a marketplace that is balanced, or it is more towards a buyer's market, that is where we do higher volumes of auctions, because ultimately we are coming into a market that doesn't have the same faith in it as Australasia, and having that been established and having a runway for hundreds of years versus the North American marketplace. We had to really go through and do our research. And what we found is that over the last 25 years cycle is that 80% of the time the market sat within a buyer's market perspective. A buyer's market, not even a balanced market, a buyer's market. So that market that we dealt with over the last number of years during COVID, okay, that market was distorted because it's a market like we'd never seen and fueled by situations that we had never seen really before in our lifetime. So when I'm classifying the COVID market, guys, to be clear, that is from March 2020 through to the end of 2021. That is not just an individual 12 months. That is obviously the COVID market that I am referring to. I believe the beginning of 2022 hadn't really seen the shortfall of the interest rate rises and different things that had come into the economy that had slowed things down, okay, and that reintroduction of the supply chain actually not being as bottlenecked, is that the beginning of 2022 was still really good. It was the latter part of 2022 that I don't believe that people have really accounted for in their best sense. I'll give you an example through all of our companies and everything that we've looked at and the companies we consult for and we go coach with, is that we've seen that roughly about 75% of income was made in the first 6 months of 2022. So when it comes down to the end P&L, or the come down to the end GCI or results that you're looking for by the end of the year, that can be heightened by a bigger than or more robust 6 months, first 6 months, than what the latter half of that year was. And that's where some people can be caught out by creating these false perceptions of success or false perceptions of doing well in 2022, where some are disappointed that they just did the same. I was talking to an agent just before I came into this studio, and she was disappointed that she'd done the same as what she had done roughly the previous year. And I said, well, hey, I actually think that that's an incredible achievement. So the COVID goggle effect is something that I think we all need to wrap our head around. And where I go to that is that I'd like to talk about net growth. And net growth being something that where we have to really understand what exactly was real growth. Did we ride the price increase that the average sale price in most of the markets were? For example, it was interesting to understand the net growth of the companies that we operated with through 2021, 2022, and also 2020. Going back and looking at all of those averages, is that the average sale price in those marketplaces had increased across all of those markets that we've operated in, predominantly west coast of North America, had increased by about 38%. The average increase that we had seen out of an individual office was roughly along the lines of a 27 to 30% increase, meaning in some cases, that office had not even ridden the wave, or some of those agents had not even ridden the wave of the price increases in the marketplace. So again, just to explain what I'm explaining about, understanding your net growth is that, say the market goes up 10% from an average home sale perspective, your business goes up 12%. That means there was only a 2% net growth. So understanding that, did you ride the wave? Did you ride the wave of the market, or did you have serious net growth over those COVID years? That's something that I would reflect on a little bit deeper to set your expectations accordingly. It's like resetting a seller's expectations that properties don't sell within the first week anymore, because COVID certainly gave them the expectation that that was going to happen. That typically it was 30 days until they would become frustrated with the agent-client relationship. Now that we're seeing that progress down towards a 2-week mark where the seller starts to begin to be frustrated, unless there's a deeper explanation in the very beginning. So understanding your net growth is an important element to make sure that you understand whether or not you really grew in that COVID market, or whether you rid the wave of the market itself. Some of the statistics that I want to make sure that we talk about also from a planning perspective is that we've seen from an income perspective across, just using general real estate statistics across all of the offices that we operate with, keeping in mind that we are very, very close in the running of most of the offices that the auction process is integrated with, is that one of the real things that we have seen is that over the last 6 months of 2022, which was only equating to 25% of all revenue for 2022 itself, 78% of all of the revenue came from listings, meaning that the run of buyers has actually stopped. If you look at an industry as a whole, being the real estate industry, it was out of skew. What I mean by that, in the COVID marketplace from the 2020 March 2020 through to the end of 2021, there was more of a balance towards more deals happening for regular agents through the buyer side. The buyer side was equating to most revenue coming in and out of the real estate industry because obviously there was a lot of different connections within the real estate industry, but those less than full-time agents and their sphere, they would make mention about real estate, and then they would just obviously snag some of those buyers away from the career real estate agents, and they would represent those buyers. Now, as we've moved into the latter half of 2022 and looking at those numbers, 78% of all the income has come from listings, meaning that I truly believe over the next 12 months, your business needs to be geared towards listings. Buyers are going to take too long. You're not going to be able to control that level of business. And that is really important for you to think about in the planning element. It's gearing your business towards a listing orientated business. The one thing that I've seen across the board from a lot of the top agents that we operate with, they all are primarily listing agents. And then from there, their businesses have seen a steady level all the way through COVID and all the way outside of COVID towards into 2022 and the latter half of 2022, that consistency maintaining. And I believe that listings are going to be the key for consistent business in 2023 as well. But the one thing that I wanted to share is some statistics on from an industry perspective, and looking at all of this is that I believe that there is some upside there. I don't believe prices are going to, drastically decrease as much as what some doom and gloom sayers are saying out there because of the lack of inventory that we will see in most marketplaces, because people not being able to go and buy another property and not wanting to release the interest rate that they got because of the refinancing they likely did well before the interest rate started to tick up. It doesn't make logical or financial sense for a person to move on unless they are moving external to a state or anything along those lines. So what we're seeing is we're still seeing in those transitional markets like the Oregons, the Texases, the Floridas, and everything along those lines, those markets still being propped up by people moving from the likes of, say, California, New York, and those more expensive marketplaces. However, the one thing I will say that I am, cautiously optimistic about in the market is that we will see the licenses come up for a lot of agents towards the end of 2022. And the industry is saying that there's 1.6 million realtors out there at the moment. They would expect by the end of 2022, maybe even at the end of 2022, maybe even the end of 2023, that number should be more around that million mark. So there won't be as many of those part-time realtors that are taking away so many of the deals away from the career realtors that are out there as well. So the thing that we've looked at is that if you look at 2018, 2019 as real estate markets, individually they were decent real estate markets. So turnover, volume of transactions, the one thing that we've seen really dry up over the last number of months leading into 2023. But the one thing I will say is that if you were to look at the statistics leading prior to COVID, is that the average number of deals that happened in all of the US was 5,340,000 roughly transactions happened in the US in 2018 and 2019. If you take a look at what those numbers were for 2021 and 2022, 2021 being a record year across the board over the last 20 plus years, was 6,120,000 properties were transacted in the US. Looking towards the end of 2022 is that number's going to sort of pan out around 5.95 million properties that transacted. Now, even if we have a downtick from a transaction perspective of 12%, which would be relatively drastic, even if we went down to 2011 statistics, is what most people are saying is that the volume of transactions is going to hover around that 2000 volume, that's still around that 5.2 to 5.3 million transactions in North America. So anybody that was around in 2011 all the way through to 2018, 2019, whilst obviously there's different markets that are nuanced, they were still pretty good real estate marketplaces historically. Now, that said, is that those volumes of transactions, keeping in mind that they were at certain price points that hadn't seen the obvious inflation that we've seen of the average sale price. So where I'm going to this is, let's say that we have that downtick of between 12 and 15% of transaction volume, you're still going to be dealing with prices that are far higher and commissions that are far higher. So all in all, if you table that with the volume of realtors being vastly down because those part-time realtors won't be able to exist anymore within the real estate industry, and they won't be as distracting to the career realtors, those that are the longevity realtors, those that are willing to make a commitment, those that are willing to make that commitment of growth, they are going to see, I believe, opportunities to really increase market shares within their marketplaces. So all in all, I believe that 2023 can be an astounding opportunity. I think there's opportunity in any marketplace, but based on the reasons that I've given you there from a numbers perspective, but also you've got to make the commitment that you are going to grow or that you are happy probably doing the same amount as what you previously did or even less. It's really evaluating that mental set that you have leading into the year. And if you are ready to go, if you are ready to fight for your market share, if you're ready to really blaze a trail for you within your marketplace itself, then this is the year for you. There's no question from a growth perspective. But also, if you are somebody that wants to maintain, that is okay as well. Just understanding that the nurturement of what you already have will be the most important portion of that. A lot of people are going to have questions about the real estate industry. You need to be the voice of that real estate industry in order to make sure that you forge relationship with your future clients. Thanks so much for listening, guys. Best of luck in 2023. Please make sure that you take into consideration that auction could really increase your business as well. Another department within an already perfectly established real estate business, or if you're starting a real estate business, is that it could be that leading edge as a point of difference for you in 2023. Well, if you've gotten this far, it either means that I'm on autoplay speaking to nobody, or you got to the end of the episode because you like what we do. If that's the case, I'd love your help. If you could like, follow, or subscribe, whether you're listening on a podcast or you're watching us on YouTube, that would really mean the world to us as we try and expand our message and our audience. Maybe one step further, asking a little too much, but if you could leave a positive review or share this episode with somebody that you think would find it beneficial, that would help advance our audience. Also, if you're looking for any future topics for us to cover, if you're watching on YouTube, just comment below, or to reach out, ben.brady@harcourtsauctions.com. Thanks again.